as a treat for myself. I went for a drink on my own and to a lap dance bar that I liked, to watch a scantily clad young woman dance for me. It was dark and dank on the street, and as I walked towards the venue I liked, and the street had filled with office workers who'd finished for the day and were on the way home. I'd walked straight down the wooden stairs once there to the bar where I'd paid my £10 entrance. That included my first dance. I'd paid for my entrance, I'd ordered my drink, and yeah, it was a whiskey. Not cool. A double. Wish I'd taken across to a small copper-top table which overlooked the small dais and pole, and sat on the red leather bench seating that surround the room, the mirror behind me. And as I did, I met May, the Thai whose smile just enchanted me. And she'd been the first to dance for me at Atmosphere at the Pen and Wig. Oh, sheens. May was dressed for the season in a red top and abbreviated skirt which covered from her hips to her crotch and no more, and displayed more than it hid. The top and the skirt were red with a mock fur trim, and she also wore knee-length black zip-up boots. It mattered not that May's use of English is not as good as some, but it was sufficient for me that May smiled easily when she saw me. I liked that. I also liked that she joined me where I'd chosen to sit at her instigation, not mine. I'd even liked that she'd been able to tell me roughly where she'd seen me last. I'd really liked that. It meant a pretty young lady that I had joined seeing naked remembered me well, to judge by the smile on her face. At my bidding she'd sat with me, and as I had looked around I'd noticed her steal the occasional glance at me, as I did her. I'd given her the house dollar, paid on my entrance, and said to me, "Wait till there's a shack on you want to dance to." And as we sat in the easy silence, I looked to my right more than once, just to be sure she was there, really there. As I'd sat in such pleasant company, I began to survey the lounge. There hadn't been many customers in. I had enough customers at that time of the day to please me, as several somewhat slim ladies, scantily clad, had passed where we sat to go to the ladies. Then Pim walked past, May's friend, with skin a little darker than her olive tone, and Pim's smile, bright and wide, is a feature of hers I recall first. Pim's outfit was in blue and white candy stripes, and a sort of abbreviated nurse's outfit that ended at the top of her thighs, complete with apron and cap, each resplendent with a red cross. Pim walked to the left, where a fellow sat several tables away, his back to the wall. She had asked the fellow if he wanted to dance, then turned his rebuttal into a show, as Pim had danced with the pole, to suggest, I had mused, just what the little pudgy fellow wearing gold-rimmed glasses had missed. Yeah. Although thinking back, it might have just been to keep things warm. A few minutes later, she'd gone out, wearing her coat telling me she'd gone. When I'd asked my companion where she disappeared, I'd been told she was cold and gone for hot chocolate. And in companionable silence, May, at my side, had looked round the room, aware she was watching me. Across the room, a natural blonde danced to a table of 3 eager young men, each spellbound by a distinct enthusiasm and attempt to please. And we sat as she listened for a favourite track, smiling and still looking towards me once in a while. Then hearing a song she liked, May had stood looking towards me, smiling broadly, wordlessly saying to me, "I dance now." As if in silent answer, I had put my hands to the sides of my thighs as May had brought a chair towards us and towards the table a little so as to make space. Then with her hands on the back of the chair, May had dipped her back, her firm buttocks swaying gently back and forth to music she chose to dance to, using the chair as a prop. She had thrust her pert derriere towards me, and as it had risen and fallen to music, I'd gazed with delight. As she'd begun to find the music's rhythm, May had begun to strip to the beat. I just sat there, my hands obediently at my sides, staring at the lovely young lady as she had danced for me. As May had removed her top, display her upthrust young breasts, I'd learned that I still found May quite fascinating. Her body, her golden skin, so perfect to behold, and it being that brief material covering her firm breasts. She dropped to the left as she had stripped to the beat. Then her crotch, but a foot away from my face, May hooked her thumbs in the elastic of her panties and, looking at me, lips pursed, she threw them down to the smooth golden thighs and then off her legs. When she'd unveiled the shaven split peaches inches before me, I looked up to her eyes as May realised just where I stared. Her hairless sex held my attention but a moment before I'd looked back to her beautiful face as she smiled at me. I recall her looking towards me over her left shoulder as I observed her cup, her left breast pinching that rosette seat between finger and thumb. At first she began by just shifting her weight from one foot to the other, then back again, swaying gently from side to side. Then, as she began to find the music's rhythm, May began to strip to the beat, and I just sat there, my hands obediently at my sides, as I stared at her beautiful body as she danced for me. With her hands on the back of the chair, she dipped her back, her firm buttocks swaying gently to the music she'd chosen to dance to for me. As she danced, May transformed from the demure young woman I'd met on my entrance into a sensuous, diminutive tease. I'd watched the pretty Asian, absolutely baked, her long white socks and calf-length zip-up boots dance for me, my whiskey and my problems forgotten. And as she reminded me, it's been months since I last seen May, and I won't have to wait so long next time. I thought, as the track ended. Then she had turned to stand before me, taking my cheeks in her hands to kiss me on the cheek, before seeking her clothes and beginning to dance. I remember I had paused a moment to say to me, sincerely, thank you. Then once more we'd sat in that easy silence as I'd sipped at my drink, just pleased to have her company. And as we sat and talked, as the room filled with one after another, all seeking female company and a drink, then looking to my right, my attention was taken by the blonde with the shoulders I had noticed earlier. She had finished a dance with a fellow who sat in a small enclave just off from the dance floor. As the blonde addressed, Maid asked me, "Do you see someone you would like a dance from?" She had smiled her understanding, and she had noticed my gaze, then stood and walked across the room to talk to the blonde for me. "I'll just be a moment," Maid said, standing and walking across the room, and the young woman I had been staring at. I watched them talk, and as the blonde continued to dress, feeling very aware that May was talking to her of my desire to see her dance, I'd sipped at my drink and enjoyed the scotch and dragged on my smoke as the two spoke, and my nerves began to fray. They had chatted a minute or so, and that had dragged. And it was then I'd seen both girls smile. Then I had begun to relax as they walked my way. As the blonde walked towards me with her, I had taken in and appreciated how tall she was in comparison to May. She was tall with a generous bust, a flat stomach, and a narrow waist with flared wide hips and a powerful looking thighs and very long legs. She strode across with a smiling May, and I'll confess, my heart beat as fast as it does with May, which just doesn't always happen with every semi-naked woman I meet. And having across May, straightened her skirt a little, and before bidding farewell and saying once more how good it had been to see me, then after the tall-legged blonde had sat to my right where May had just earlier, I'd asked her name as I stared at her face. With straight hair, worn and a centre part, the colour of sun-ripened corn, and cut to emphasise her long neck and oval face, inset with beautiful pale blue doe-like eyes. She had told me Yvonne, with a Slavic accent that had intrigued me. Needless to say, I had to ask, "Where are you from?" "From Poland," she had answered, speaking of the music, her lips close to my ear. The scrap of material she might call a skirt draped across her right knee. Yvonne had told me she'd been in Britain just over 6 months, a Pole whose English was better than most I've ever known. She answered the questions I had made with ease, and whilst I'd been aware very much so of her naked right thigh pressed right against my right. As she spoke in that gentle Slavic tone, I listened intently as Yvonne told me how long she'd been in England, aware of her legs crossed right over left, her thigh but a foot away from my gaze, as I'd proffered my ear to hers. "Will you dance for me now?" I'd asked, interrupting. Although I must say, I'd wanted her quiet, but seeing how she could move, I wanted to see that, there and then. She had nodded and stood, a trifle nervous at first, I thought. Yet, as she'd found the feel of the piece that she danced to, Yvonne really quickly relaxed, moving with grace despite her somewhat Juno-esque charms. And as she twisted and turned her, I'd sat rapt by her every move. Watching her as she gyrated her body to the music and unclasped her black top to unveil the beautiful breasts of a generous size, albeit just right for her, each tip with a small nipple set amongst an a delicate rose pink. With a thumb hooked to the elastic of her panties, Yvonne wriggled briefly to ease the removal of the fine black panties drawn tight over her curvaceous buttocks, and I caught my breath briefly as Yvonne faced me, a shaven mound but inches from my, and I looked up to her eyes, then back to her thighs as Yvonne turned, caressing her flesh. Any nerves gone? She'd appeared to take her pride in my arousal as Yvonne stood over her shoulders as she teased her left nipple into hardness, then with her back dipped, her belly rose and fell with her magnificent buttocks raised, and Yvonne had smiled as she smacked at her right cheek with an open hand, and although it is arrogant of me to assume, I'm correct, I think. I felt a moment's contagion between us as my fervour for her seemed to fuel her eagerness to please, to entice, and Yvonne had continued to dance with fervour, and finally the track had ended. She had finally kissed the left side of my face and said thank you. Thank you, I'd repeated, parrot-like, suddenly feeling very gauche, much as I had when I first met May. I had interrupted her dressing for a moment to kiss her hand, as is my custom to do. Then, staring deep into her eyes, I'd allowed her fingertips to slowly drift from mine, and I sat back in my seat to watch Yvonne as she continued to dress. She had sat where she had sat earlier, to my right, and once more we had chatted of this and that. I recall her saying, "You're a nice man." And I recall saying, "I do like people, but meeting you, I'll regret not meeting you again." Then, after a while, with my whiskies gone and no more smokes in my tin, and many more customers coming in, I'd stood to take my leave, and I said, "I hope I'll see you again." And I'd gone to the Pen for its atmosphere. being lucky enough to acquire Muse Needed. And as I'd left that night, I'd wondered, now, how could I ever objectively write of all of that?